Всім добрий вечір.
On behalf of the brave, on behalf of every father and every mother who waits for freedom, on behalf of our warriors, and paves the way for a new history.
Dobry вечер, good evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you're tuning in from. Welcome to Tochnyi. We recognize an ally when we see them. We all recognize attempted intimidation when we see it. Support your friends, not your enemies. Make the right choice. These principles we inculcate into those younger than us, with the lives of millions under the US president's own choices, with millions of lives on the line. Welcome to Tochnyi. Please subscribe to Tochnyi on Blue Sky, X, YouTube. Please check out our website, which has many recent research posts, including an article by Erlend, extremely relevant to this week's events pertaining to potential scenarios facing any peacekeeping mission under the current status in bello by European troops in Ukraine. We genuinely really appreciate all of your support since we migrated from Elon's X over 2 years ago. I will hand over now to Joseph for the news.
These are the main headlines as of March 2nd, 2025. First up, we have operations. An individual from Ukraine's National Security Council said that a major oil processing plant near Ryazan was targeted, noting that it produces fuel crucial for Russian air operations. This marks the third time this year that Ukrainian forces have targeted the important site, which ranks among Russia's largest oil refining facilities. The governor also mentioned on social media that a fire broke out at the plant after debris from intercepted drones caused sparks. Meanwhile, Russian defense authorities confirmed that they intercepted 22 Ukrainian drones overnight, including 2 spotted over the area southeast of Moscow. South Korea's intelligence agency disclosed on the 27th of February that North Korea sent additional forces to assist Russian units in their ongoing engagements with Ukrainian troops in the Kursk Oblast. While the exact number remains unconfirmed, anonymous sources cited in South Korean media suggest that between 1,000 and 3,000 soldiers have been deployed. Earlier intelligence indicated that North Korea already committed around 12,000 troops to the region to back up Russia, with subsequent efforts highlighting severe losses among those ranks, figures reaching up to approximately 4,000 according to Ukrainian sources. South Korean analysts are still assessing the current scale of the fresh reinforcement, particularly after previous encounters where North Korean contingents suffered significant setbacks against Ukrainian units. The latest update from the intelligence service noted that the reinforcements began participating in combat operations in early February, although details on their numbers remain under review. Over 1,000 North Korean personnel reached Russia between January and February through maritime departures from Chongjin and by rail from Rason, with the use of these varied transportation methods complicating tracking efforts. Other estimates from regional media align with the idea that the new force comprises between 1,000 and 3,000 soldiers. In an interview with a Ukrainian news outlet, Ukraine's top intelligence official, Kirill Budanov, indicated that the Russian military unit operating on the African continent is not slowing down, but is in fact increasing its operations. He explained that although some argue Russia is facing setbacks in Africa, their underlying goal appears to be controlling a string of countries that cut across the continent from east to west, establishing a route that all other countries must follow. Budanov noted that while Russian plans have been effectively dismantled in several nations, they continue this effort. After being forced to leave Syria, Russian forces have redirected their focus toward establishing a presence in Libya, following a systematic pattern of redeployment. He also mentioned that similar shifts are underway elsewhere, with challenges in Latin America leading Russia to redirect its focus to Central Asia and even maintaining a military presence in Myanmar. Up next, we have economy and aid. The Danish government recently announced an assistance package valued at 2 billion Danish kroner, which is around 268 million euros, for Ukraine. On the third anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion, Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen highlighted the need for Ukraine to secure the strongest possible position. The allocated funds are set to support the supply of ammunition to Ukrainian forces and help build a brigade-sized unit in cooperation with the Nordic and Baltic nations. During official events in Kyiv alongside European Union leadership and other European heads of state, The Prime Minister expressed pride in Denmark's leadership in providing support to Ukraine. She stressed the urgency of continuing the support by expediting weapon deliveries and further investing in Ukraine's defense sector, noting that current actions will have a lasting impact on the future of Ukraine and Europe. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced that Canada will deliver additional military support and financial aid to Ukraine, funded by previously frozen Russian assets. The support package includes the delivery of 25 more LAV-3 infantry fighting vehicles and 2 armored combat support vehicles, with the latter intended for upcoming training exercises in Germany. Canada plans also to provide a satellite system for the F-16 and 4 trainer machines for these aircraft, with these assets expected to arrive in the coming months. The new contribution adds to an extensive supply of ammunition, equipment, and first aid kits already provided to Ukraine earlier in the year. The aid package also features a financial commitment of 5 billion Canadian dollars, which includes a grant to help Ukraine safeguard its energy security after disruptions to its infrastructure by Russia. Also, Ukraine's primary defense industry organization, Ukroboronprom, has reached an agreement with the Canadian firm Rochelle to produce armored personnel carriers domestically. According to a Telegram update, the Ukrainian side will obtain the technical specifications and necessary components to manufacture the vehicles, which are already in service with its armed forces. The Ukrainian Minister for Strategic Industries explained that by shifting production to local facilities, the delivery time to frontline units will be reduced. The national economy will also receive a boost, and domestic manufacturers will gain access to more advanced technologies. The head of Ukroboronprom also confirmed that Ukraine is continuing to develop its own range of tanks and armored combat vehicles, and that the Ingwar 3 vehicle has successfully completed its field evaluations and started to secure orders. The Norwegian government has announced a plan to spend 3.5 billion Norwegian kroner, roughly 300 million euros, to buy military equipment directly from Ukraine's defense sector. An extra 600 million Norwegian kroner, or 50 million euros, will be set aside for acquiring various drone systems and advancing unmanned technology for Ukraine's armed forces. The Prime Minister stated that by purchasing military gear directly from Ukrainian producers, Norway is not only supplying needed equipment, but also helping boost the country's own production capabilities. Previously, a 500 million Norwegian kroner investment was made in November 2024 to fund weapon production by Ukrainian enterprises. The Norwegian authorities also plan to collaborate with domestic firms to build a cooperative relationship with Ukraine, aiming to share technology and expertise, a prospect which would benefit both sides. A significant delegation from Norwegian business circles recently visited Ukraine to explore further opportunities for such partnerships. A new scheme was also introduced for 2025 intended to lower risks for Norwegian companies investing in or exporting to Ukraine. Also, the Norwegian firm Kongsberg Defence and Aerospace, Erlend, is actively pursuing a plan to create a collaborative manufacturing operation in Ukraine. In a recent interview, the company's president explained that discussions are underway with local industry to form a joint venture aimed at significantly increasing the production of missiles for air defense systems using Ukrainian technology. The effort aims for mass production with plans to produce hundreds of missiles, and the new partnership is expected to be established in the coming months. He emphasized that the initiative is being developed with a view toward lasting cooperation and sees a future in which Ukraine becomes an integral part of the supply network for the defense systems once current hostilities conclude. The president further noted that there is considerable technological progress taking place in Ukraine and that his company is eager to contribute to and benefit from the advancements. Denmark has entered into an agreement with the Norwegian-Finnish defense firm Nammo to manufacture artillery shells, with production set to take place at a facility in northern Jutland, as reported by a local newspaper. In an effort to boost domestic production capabilities, the Danish Defense Ministry announced plans to repurchase the former ammunition Sarsanelet plant, Erlend, in northern Jutland during 2023. The historic facility, originally built in the 17th century, was sold in 2008 for approximately $2.4 million to a Spanish ammunition manufacturer. Despite its sale, the plant continued to produce weaponry and provide services to the Ministry of Defense, remaining a vital supplier until a persistent financial issue led to shutdown and complete liquidation in 2020. Following its closure, the facility and its remaining infrastructure were sold to private investors who converted the area into a technology park, marking the end of a long-standing local enterprise and the halt of ammunition production in Denmark. The Danish government later invested around 20 million kroner, or 2.6 million euros, to regain control of the site, which spans around 18,000 square meters and includes 50 buildings. Nammo, recognized as one of Europe's foremost ammunition manufacturers, is expected to support Ukraine by supplying artillery shells. Additionally, it was revealed in 2024 that NAMO is also set to commence the production of 155mm shells using technology provided by NAMO. The International Monetary Fund and Ukrainian officials have reached staff-level agreement on the 7th review of the 4-year extended fund facility valued at $15.5 billion, which, pending IMF Executive Board approval, clears the way for an additional installment of around $400 million. The latest disbursement increases the total funds released under the program to around $10 billion. The IMF noted that program performance remains robust, with all quantitative performance targets for the end of last year being met and mutual understandings established on a comprehensive set of policies and reforms designed to sustain macroeconomic stability. Since February 20th, the IMF mission has been working in Kyiv and Warsaw, and progress on structural reforms continues with 7 key milestones achieved, 1 milestone implemented later than planned, and solid commitments to make further important reforms. The report stated that restoring fiscal sustainability over the medium term depends on rigorous reforms to boost domestic revenue, reduce tax evasion and avoidance, and enhance the investment climate. The effort should be supported by improvements in tax administration and ongoing reforms within the State Customs Service and Tax Service. Achieving debt sustainability will rely on these revenue-focused adjustments as well as on the continuation of the government's debt restructuring strategy. The report further stressed the need for enhanced independence, competence, and credibility in anti-corruption and judicial institutions, pointing to the recent parliamentary adoption of legislation to establish a high administrative court as an important step forward. Swift implementation of this legislation will facilitate the rapid formation of the court, a move seen as crucial for effective public investment management. This management is said to be a key factor in post-war recovery, reconstruction, and sustainable growth. Finally, while the financial sector is currently stable, ongoing caution is advised given the existing risks. Developing robust financial markets and infrastructure is essential to support rapid reconstruction and recovery by stimulating private investment and attracting foreign capital. Close collaboration with financial market stakeholders is also said to be vital to formulating a prioritized reform agenda, a process that the National Bank of Ukraine has begun in coordination with relevant parties. On February 24th, the UK government unveiled its most extensive set of restrictions on Russia since the onset of the full-scale invasion. The announcement, shared via a government press release, stressed the country's steadfast commitment to support of Ukraine. The new sanctions list targets 107 individuals and organizations involved in producing and supplying machinery, electronics, and dual-use items crucial for Russia's military, including microprocessors integral to weapon systems sourced from a variety of third-country intermediaries in Central Asia, Turkey, Thailand, India, and China. The measures also extend to high-ranking officials from North Korea, including its defense minister and other senior figures who played a role in deploying over 11,000 North Korean personnel in support of Russia. For the first time, the UK also imposed restrictions on foreign financial institutions that facilitate Russia's military expenditures, specifically naming a Kyrgyzstan-based bank to disrupt Russia's access to international finance. Additional sanctions have been designed to further impact Russia's energy revenues, which remain a critical source of funding for its operations, by targeting another group of 40 oil tankers identified as part of the Shadow Fleet. Market sources indicate that shipments of Russian crude from the Far East and Iranian oil to China are set to resume in March. This change comes as non-sanctioned vessels have joined the transportation routes, effectively replacing those that were affected by the U.S. embargo. Analysts say that restarting these shipments could ease earlier concerns about supply shortages, which had contributed to higher global oil prices. An analyst from a major energy data firm observed that freight charges for tankers carrying crude oil from Kozmino Port in Russia's Far East to China have increased substantially. As a result, at least 17 tankers free of U.S. sanctions have been assigned to this route over the past month. Some of these vessels were previously involved in transporting oil from regions like the Baltic or were engaged in moving petroleum products. Additional market data shows that a number of tankers not covered by the embargo have recently joined the shipments between Russia and China. One factor contributing to increased export volumes is a reduction in processing at Russian refineries, an impact linked to Ukrainian drone operations that has left more crude available for export. On February 28th, NBC reported that the U.S. State Department had ended a major USAID program that had allocated hundreds of millions of U.S. dollars to repair Ukraine's energy grid, which had suffered significant damage from Russian military operations during the ongoing invasion. 2 USAID officials involved in the Ukraine mission indicated that the decision comes as several regions are experiencing overnight power outages caused by continued strikes on energy facilities. One official explained that halting the project may weaken the current administration's position in ceasefire negotiations and send a signal to Russia that prior investments in Ukraine are no longer a priority. USAID has played a critical role in helping Ukraine stabilize its economy by supporting their energy grid. Alongside the termination of this project, USAID is drastically reducing its operational footprint in Ukraine. Previously, 64 American government employees and contractors were stationed in the country, but that number will fall to just 8 as non-essential personnel are ordered to return to the United States. The move is part of a broader reduction in staffing for USAID's Bureau for Europe and Eurasia, which now will see its Washington, D.C.-based team decrease from 115 to 29 employees. Officials warn that these reductions could leave Ukraine's energy infrastructure increasingly vulnerable during the winter months as Russian missile strikes continue. Finally, we have foreign relations. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio outlined the closest thing he has to a plan to address Russia's close ties with China. He noted that Washington aims to lessen the ties without creating conflict between the two nuclear-armed nations. Rubio indicated uncertainty about whether the U.S. could ever completely separate Russia from its engagement with China and warned that pitting the two against each other would be harmful to global stability given their significant military capabilities. Rubio also raised the risk of a scenario where Russia might become excessively dependent on China, which would leave Moscow little flexibility to improve its ties with Washington due to economic reliance on Chinese markets and diplomatic support from Beijing. He argued that this would ultimately be disadvantageous for U.S. interests. Also, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth directed U.S. Cyber Command to suspend any plans for digital actions against Russia, including any offensive operations. The directive was communicated to Cyber Command's chief, General Timothy Haag, who then passed it on to his team. However, the order does not extend to the National Security Agency, which Haag also leads, nor does it affect its signals intelligence activities aimed at Russia. Sources indicated that the move might disrupt some of the command's most significant operations targeting a major digital adversary, including those linked to activities in Ukraine. Finally this week, and if you read the news, the only thing that actually happened, during a high-profile Oval Office meeting last Friday, President Trump sharply criticized President Zelensky for what he described as a lack of proper courtesy, and then unexpectedly halted the signing of a minerals agreement that, according to Trump, would have advanced Ukraine's efforts to end its war with Russia. The cancellation of the deal, which was expected to grant the United States increased access to Ukraine's rare earth minerals and was to be announced jointly in a press conference, now raises questions about its future and broader implications for international affairs, particularly in Europe. Trump maintained that the minerals agreement was critical for the United States to recover some of the aid that was provided to Kyiv since the start of the war. Following a contentious exchange, senior advisors requested that Zelensky leave the White House, marking an abrupt end to the meeting. During the confrontation, Trump warned that Ukraine was taking dangerous risks that could have severe global repercussions and criticized Zelensky for failing to show due respect to the United States, a nation that in his view had supported Ukraine far more than others. The final 10 minutes of the nearly 45-minute meeting devolved into a tense dialogue involving Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, and Zelensky. The Ukrainian leader, meanwhile, expressed his reservations regarding Russia's commitment to diplomacy, citing a long history of unfulfilled promises and broken treaties by Moscow. And on that depressing note, those were the headlines this week. We'll now move to the next segment.
Yeah, and that would be me. Hello, guys. As always, I will now present this week's most important news from Germany regarding Ukraine. This week, however, not a lot noteworthy happened, so I just have a single item to present. On Tuesday, an EU delegation has handed over 25 Volkswagen Amarok pickups, which were co-financed by the German government, to the National Police of Ukraine. According to the NPU, these vehicles will increase the capabilities and capacities of the police to operate in areas closer to the front line. And yeah, as I already said, that's it for my segment. So back to you, Joseph.
Well, very quickly, I just wanted to cover just a little bit of extra news bits that I didn't quite get into the broadcast and squeeze into the broadcast in time. So one thing that happened after, or I guess it wasn't really worth covering as like actual news, but just there was basically universal support for Ukraine and Zelensky expressed by almost every European leader, at least that I saw, like everyone basically except Hungary and I think Slovakia. So just like very strong unanimity from European leaders, at least in their rhetoric about what happened. And then I just want to talk to Erlend. Oh, and then there was a report of the UK and Ukraine signing a loan agreement. Obviously, we're happy that the loan agreement proceeded, but we just wanted to say, like, that's kind of old news. Like, it was already announced months and months ago. So while it's good and while it's great that it got signed and everything, we don't really consider that a new development. So you might have seen that in the news. It's kind of something that was agreed to last summer. It's great that it's moving forward. But I want to talk to Erlend a little bit. I already covered some of the stuff going on with Norway. Norway just sent a like small military aid package to Ukraine for drones and stuff. They're trying to start collaborating more with not just the defense industry, but I would say just industry in general. They're trying to make it easier for Norwegian businesses. And there were a few other developments this week that we wanted to go over. So the first was there's some discussion in Parliament about maybe increasing aid. And real quick, I should just mention for our audience, the reason Norwegian aid in Norway is kind of an important player in this is they have a lot of wealth. They have a big sovereign wealth fund. They have the ability, because of the change in the whole gas scenario in Europe, they have a lot of income from that, and they have the ability to really change the game here if they kind of figure out how to do this politically. So that's why we're so interested in Norway, and I wanted to kind of check in because there were some developments this week. So Mr. Erlend, there was some discussion in Parliament this week about not only a new budget, I think that would include more aid to Ukraine, but also some discussion, and this is much less serious, but some discussion about maybe getting more serious with the sovereign wealth fund in Ukraine. So I just wanted you to cover any developments going on in the local press and such.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that the thing with the gas and the extra income, since Russia started started preparing for the invasion of Ukraine in 2021, gas prices drastically increased. Of course, then Europe shut off most of its gas supplies from Russia, except from ocean-carried LNG, which is still happening to some degree. Norway benefited massively by that. And it's estimated by the Ministry of Finance in Norway that about 1,200 billion kroners is the extra income that we have earned on this in 2022 and 2023. And third-party analysts estimate the extra income to be more than double that total.
How many euros is that, Erlend?
So that's around more than 200 billion euros. Just on top of what we normally would have expected. But the thing is that this is projected to continue for more or less indefinite until we stop, pumping up gas and oil, really. So the estimates of the overall possible extra income that we would have not expected if it wasn't for Russia's aggression are in the thousands of billions of kroners. So there's this moral question: is this war profiteering? I think it's a little bit far off to call it automatically war profiteering, but when there is a question about how much we should be given compared to the rest of countries in Europe, because we have this advantage, let's say it that way. When that has not been addressed within the framework that we're earning more because of the war, and like the politicians have completely refused to acknowledge this as a factor of what we should, or for how much we should give. And when that is a fact, I think it's more or less going towards war profiteering. But there are some strange lines there, and it's hard to kind of define it. The development hasn't really been in Parliament yet, but since we talked last time about Norwegian government stuff, the government has fallen, and there's a new government with only one of the parties that were in the last government. It's a minority government made up of only the Labour Party, where previously also the Central Party were a part of the government. They're gone. That doesn't necessarily automatically mean better for Ukraine, but it should, because the Central Party is not really that interested in Ukraine. it seems. And also, you basically only have one party to litigate with and put pressure on. It's also easier for them to reach over to the rest of the opposition now, basically bypassing the central party. And what's developed in the last week or 2 weeks in Norway is that several of the regional congresses has been held in the Labour Party, which they do every 2 years, and they're preparing for the National Congress, which is coming up soon. And basically, all of them have basically decided on this policy that they will bring forward to the rest of the party, where they want to triple the aid within 2025. That would bring it to about 105 billion kroners, which amounts to a little bit less than 9 billion euros, I think. And that's important. That would be a massive boost for Ukraine, of course.
Yeah, and I think an official also remarked this week in the government that like we need to start talking about using the sovereign wealth fund to help Ukraine, or was that did I miss something?
A lot of different people have been saying this. There was a letter signed by more than 40 university professors in economics about this. Previous leader of the sovereign wealth fund, previous central bank manager. But from the government side, there hasn't been anyone saying that. But there's been several members of parliament from the Labour Party who's saying, yeah, we should be thinking differently about the sovereign wealth fund with regards to Ukraine.
Gotcha. Cool. Yeah. So I just had heard a couple of, when I'm reading through the news reports, I noticed several things from Norway, but I wanted to get some clarification on those too. And I reported on the other stuff. So great. Thanks, Erlend. And then the other stuff I want to talk about, because it's semi-Norway related, is NASAMS, of course. I don't know what the acronym stands for, but the N stands for Norwegian, if you ask Norway. It's the NASAMS. There was a report about the NASAMS just being super successful in Ukraine. Like it's had a lot of successful interceptions. It's performed very well. And then I think there's some talk. I don't know how much we're going to talk about this, but there's some discussion about replacing the ammunition for the systems, or was that something else, or was I confusing that? So just NASAMS stuff. Were there any good NASAMS developments that we should talk about?
Well, Kongsberg has announced that the president or CEO of Kongsberg announced in an interview that Kongsberg is opening shop in Ukraine. I knew that for a while. They decided to go down that route more than 1.5 years ago, but the necessary legislation and preparations took way too much time. Of course, they were now, as far as I understood, far into opening that company in Ukraine. I'm not sure about the construction, etc. But the interesting bits and pieces that he gave is that there's an agreement with local industry in Ukraine to produce what he said, mass production of missiles for NASAMS with local Ukrainian technology. And he said we're talking about hundreds of missiles, and I don't know what that means exactly. There's been some conflicting information about that. Is it refurbishment of European stockpiles that no one can do in Europe right now, where there's a low capacity, or is it to integrate a Ukrainian-made missile in NASAMS 3?
So I guess we'll keep everyone posted if we learn anything more about that. But just some interesting developments. It seems like Norway's on the right track. Obviously, we want to see more movement on the sovereign wealth fund issue, but it's good people are talking about it, I guess. Any last stuff you want to talk about with Norway? Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize the problem here really is that the prime minister we have is very reluctant to do anything proactively. So everything positive that we're going to see is because he's being pushed, and the government basically is pushing him internally.
Keep pushing, guys. I know you're very polite, but just very politely push him. Thank you. Great stuff to hear. Thanks, Erlend, for that update on Norway. We will now move to our colleague Bionade for a report. Mr. Bionade, over to you.
Yeah, hello. I hope you can all hear me well.
Yes,
Sound is
loud
good?
and clear.
Thank you. All right. So we're gonna talk about a story today about the city of Mykolaiv. Most of you possibly have heard about the city in Ukraine south. Mykolaiv's water crisis. A city's fight for clean water. Water is life, but for over 2 years, the people of Mykolaiv lived without it. This is a story of a city that lost its water overnight, the struggle to survive on salty, undrinkable supplies, and the fight to rebuild a clean water system from the ground up. Chapter 1. The day the water stopped. On April the 12th, 2022, the day Mykolaiv's water crisis began, a Russian missile strike destroyed the main water pipeline, cutting off 500,000 residents from the only fresh water source, the Dnieper River. The damage was catastrophic, impossible to fix quickly, and as the pipeline basically ran through occupied territory. Valentina, 74 years old, a Mykolaiv resident, stated, "I turned on the tap and nothing came out. I thought it was a temporary problem, but then we realized the water was gone." The salty water problem. To avoid total collapse of the sewer system, authorities switched to pumping water from the southern Bak River. Before, basically, the city got the water from the Dnieper River. This was not possible anymore, so they decided, let's take the southern Bak River. But the problem here was the water was salty because it's in German it's called Brackwasser. I think in English Brackwasser water too. Basically, it's mixed seawater in bay areas with river water, and as you can imagine, the water is very salty. It corroded pipelines, ruined appliances, and also it is not drinkable. Doctors warned of potential health risks, especially for children and the elderly. Alexander Tsukhanov, official from Mykolaiv city, said, "We had two choices: shut off the supply and risk disease, or keep pumping salty water and destroy our pipes. It was a terrible decision to make." Yeah. Chapter 2. The daily struggle. The salty water ruined washing machines, kettles, and plumbing. It left stains on clothes and caused skin rashes after bathing. Residents had to buy expensive bottled water, which many couldn't afford. Maria, 45, a mother of two, stated, "Even the tea tasted horrible. My children refused to drink it. Cooking became impossible. We were spending half of our money on water." So how did the people cope? Relatively quickly, they started setting up water distribution points, but as expected, the queues there were really, really long, several hours of waiting time. Different aid groups like Isra Aid, which is an Israeli NGO, set up filtration stations, and the supplies basically were limited. Especially the elderly suffered the most, carrying heavy water containers every day. That's really hard. And if you have been to Ukraine or in Eastern Europe and you know the architecture of especially the high-rise buildings from the Soviet times, it's often without elevators. So it's already not amazing. Ivan, 62, a retiree, stated, "My legs aren't what they used to be. Carrying water up 5 flights of stairs every day, it was a torture." Chapter 3. The turning point. International help arrives. In 2023, Denmark steps in to help. The Danish government announced a 7.2 million project to restore Mykolaiv's water system. The focus? Rebuilding modern infrastructure that would be stronger and more resilient. So what had the project, what was included in this project? 4 kilometers of new water pipelines were installed. Reverse osmosis filtration systems were set up, helping over 4,000 residents daily. we also will have an interview upcoming in the next week with one volunteer from an NGO which works in this area and helped setting up these filtration systems. He will bring a couple of more pictures and impressions from the time there and how the city looked and what they have done. Yeah, so new energy efficient water pumping stations were built in heavily damaged areas. And yeah, basically many organizations were involved. So Denmark gave 7.2 million, the International Organization for Migration, which is a UN-related organization, NGO. They installed pipelines and boreholes for fresh water. Also, if you're interested, on the website of the International Organization for Migration are many of these stories, and the quotes I'm reading out here are often from these kind of reports. It's very human approach in their reporting. As I mentioned, Israel established community water purification systems, producing over 10 million liters of safe drinkable water. The European Investment Bank gave 20 million for Mykolaiev's water system. UNICEF and the Red Cross provided bottled water and emergency filtration systems. Danish Refugee Council supplied water pipes and water pumps. The IMAP Incorporation created a system to track water availability and coordinate aid efforts. An organization called Water Mission installed safe water systems in hospitals, schools, and shelters. CORE, the community organized relief effort, restored water infrastructure and provided humanitarian relief. And many other organizations were involved, but we cannot mention them all. Chapter 4, is the crisis over? In early 2025, some districts have finally clear water again. The Korabelny district is one of the first to regain a reliable supply, but full restoration is still ongoing. The entire city system is expected to be fully operational by late 2025. Pedro, 68, retired teacher, said, "I've thought I'd cry seeing clear water from my tap again, but here we are, finally." Yeah, Chapter 5, the future of Mykolaiv. The story of Mykolaiv isn't just about water. It's about survival, it's about resilience, and the long road to recovery. The fight isn't over yet, but for the first time in years, hope is flowing again. Yeah, this was a story of the city of Mykolaiv, a city that refused to give up. And we hope end of 2025 there will be a full city-wide pipeline restoration and a stable supply everywhere. And projected is in 2027 that there will be a new advanced water treatment facility completed, and Mykolaiv will be, have water again. And all this happened because of one missile strike on an important pipeline. A Russian missile strike, obviously. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
If anyone has any questions.
Oh yeah, I guess I'm kind of obsessed with like low power water purification for my own lunatic reasons. So I don't know, just kind of interesting stuff. Like there's something called a ram pump, right? That's I assume being implemented. I saw one ram pump for sure. A ram pump is like a way to get water pressure without power, and you need a flowing water source. So Ukraine has a lot of rivers, so it's no problem for them. If you're in a place without water or you don't have a river, it's not really useful. But basically, like you use like a one-way valve with like a spring in it. It's a very simple way to make this. You can like look on YouTube if you're like really interested in the mechanics of it, but it's very ingenious. And what it does is it kind of like stops the water just like every couple of seconds, and it uses that effect of the water stopping, and that causes pressure. It's called a hammer effect. When you like stop flowing water, it builds up pressure. and you can channel that buildup of pressure into another channel where you can like send that water uphill. So you can get about 10% of that flowing water if you're really efficient, usually about 5 if you're not. You can get about 5 to 10% of that water flowing up a really steep incline or like high up in a water tower or whatever you need to do. You get about 14 psi, if that means anything to people, using this method. Called a ram pump. So I assume that they're using like ram pumps, and then of course there's like a lot of DIY or low power water filtration systems. But once you have most of the low power water filtration stuff is gravity powered. So if you have a ram pump, you can get your stuff high up, and then you can put it through like usually it's going through sand and charcoal and a few other things to filter it to get it drinkable. So yeah, like Ukraine, thankfully they have a lot of rivers, and that makes a setup like this, like a low power ram pump, gravity filtration setup, very feasible. So I don't know, just it's a very interesting topic to me, and I of course wish people the best of luck. It's a difficult situation that they're in, and it requires a lot of ingenuity, I think, to get water in that situation. So. Best of luck to Ukrainians in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And as I said, it's sometimes something so important but so trivial like water, which can have this influence. And you can see, it's projected 2027 to have everything done in the city and having like a kind of the status quo back. Just because of this one strike, and it's things we often don't see and hear that much of the war is that not only strikes on military targets and military facilities and hospitals have big damage. Sometimes it's even a missile just hitting a field in nowhere, and there's a water pipeline down below it. All right.
Yeah, I just want to point out, Alex in chat mentioned that he's a contributor to Tochnyi, that Russia is very frequently rationing water in the occupied territories. They've never really rebuilt the water infrastructure to any reasonable degree. And like there are many reports from the occupied territories that water is very, very hard to come by.
Yeah, absolutely. That's another story, right? Like Ukraine's infrastructure in the occupied territories is like completely done, and cannot expect Russia to do something about it. Right. We have any more questions from the chat?
Well, we got a ram pump fan, but yeah, the points that are being made about ram pumps are correct, right? You need like a river. You're only able to capture a little bit of that flow and turn it into pressure. You're going to lose, like you can't just bring all your water uphill magically with this pump system. You can only capture maybe 5% of it. The rest of the water is just going to go through the river normally or go down, like it's not going to go up. So yeah, there's a big limitation on ram pumps, but Ukraine, I was just pointing out, has a very strong advantage because they have so many rivers. They can utilize this technology a lot better than say me in Arizona, right? Yeah, it's a great technology, very interesting. Check it out on YouTube if you guys are interested about ram pumps. But there's a lot of innovative solutions I've seen used in Ukraine for like low power stuff, and I'm always interested in that topic, as people might know. And I think it's going to be something that's going to be an even bigger issue this year because, as we discussed earlier, or it was in my news report, the USAID program that helped Ukraine's power grid, that was a very big program that helped Ukraine a lot. And so it's going to be very difficult for Ukraine this winter. And water and electricity are going to be hard to come by, I think, if the Russian strikes continue like they did the last 2 winters. So I really feel for all the Ukrainians going through that situation, and best of luck to all the international organizations doing their best to come up with engineering solutions to help these people deal with those problems.
Yeah. And since I'm hearing thank you from the chat. Thanks for always listening and listening to these stories. Also, I want to thank our dear editors, which video editors it is, which made this amazing footage. Really nice.
Yeah, it's good. Okay, cool. Any like last stuff, Bionade, about this topic before we wrap it up?
Yeah, upcoming interview with a person who was there and helped setting up some systems, an NGO which is just starting, is also in other areas in Ukraine active, mainly working on these kind of things. We will have in the next weeks for an interview about this topic, especially.
Okay, well, we look forward to that. Chat, if you have any maybe questions you want to like throw Bionade's way, things that might tell him like what you guys are interested in about the interview, feel free, I think, to pop it in the comments or in the chat. Yeah, thanks, Bionade, for this presentation. I think it was a good topic to cover. It's something that we don't see a lot in media reports, but it's like a very real issue in Ukraine every day. Cool. And now we will move. Oh, do you want to say something, Bionade? Okay, sorry.
Nope.
No problem. Cool. So now, Mr. Erlend, last week you were away on business, but you had an article published, and Mr. Daniele, I think, did his best to represent your article briefly, but he also had some stuff he had to do too. So I think this week we're going to give you a shot to present your article in full to our audience, and we can discuss a little bit if there's anything we want to discuss about it. So, Mr. Erlend, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, so I know that Daniele he presented the principles that I'm discussing in the article. I wrote this article because I saw kind of a crisis looming. Wanted to get it out not last week, but the week before that. It was a little bit delayed, so it took a little bit more time. I really wanted to get this out like 2-3 weeks ago, but it was difficult to get it out super fast. But this is still very on the agenda, right? And I think I want to try and use this time presenting the article as this kind of segue to what has actually happened the last 3 days. So yeah, my thesis is that, or a hypothesis is that to force Ukraine to a ceasefire, which is basically not letting Ukraine dictates the terms of when they would approach any negotiations with Russia or through the US or other allies negotiate with Russia, is a very bad thing for Europe and for Ukraine. And some of it is based on some of the things we talked about when we had Fabian Hoffman on a few weeks ago on the stream. But these are also concepts that both he has been talking about for a while, and me, and I've been also discussing this with people here and other places for a long time. That so one of the big issues here is, of course, European security. And based on the thesis of Hoffman, we may have a situation already in 1 to 2 years where Russia poses a substantial security threat to us, where they might actually be likely to do some sort of kinetic action towards either a NATO ally or other European country. And then the Baltics or Romania is one of the kind of hot candidates for such an event happening. And the only thing that is really stopping them from preparing and doing this right now is because that they're pinned down in Ukraine, fully committed with most of their capable forces. Yes, of course, Russia has some forces in reserve, and it's been pointed out in various intelligence reports in Europe, for instance, that Russia has been training some. They're doing some training for forces that are not supposed to be committed to Ukraine. But if you look at the overall effort in the Russian armed forces, they're projecting it all into Ukraine right now. And by ending the conflict prematurely without any decisive victory for Ukraine, then the danger is really that Europe is not prepared because we haven't been taking the right steps 3 years ago, and still not, to bolster our own defenses faced with a Russian army that has 3 years of battlefield experience and an economy that is completely on the war footing. So significant security risk for Europe. To resolve this with a ceasefire that is not on Ukraine or Europe's terms. That is some of the main focuses in what I'm focusing on mostly in the intro. And then I'm trying to okay, I'll jump over most of this here, but what I think is very important and what I really want people to understand is that a peace deal, a peace deal and a so-called peacekeeping mission that has been proposed by the US specifically, that they are not involved, they're not interested in being involved in any peacekeeping or security guarantees. They've said very clearly, both at Munich, at Ramstein before then, and on statements on the DoD website, that they intend not to be part of a peacekeeping force. They intend not to be part of security guarantees for Ukraine, and they do not intend NATO to have any role in the troops on the ground, or the troops on the ground being protected by NATO Article 5. So that means that lays out kind of very restricted room of operation for this kind of a peacekeeping mission. The Ukrainians then, of course, have pretty clearly stated what is needed for them to feel safe. Zelensky has been throwing some numbers out there, but they've generally only been in between 125,000 to 200,000 troops. And the reason for why that number is relevant for them is probably a calculation of what kind of troop density do you need along all the front lines, and also there's probably some sort of differences in between. Are they going to, so if you look at the screen, I'll try and make it a little bit larger. Are they only talking about where the contact line is now, or are they also talking about this entire part from around Kursk through the north of Ukraine, along the border of Russia, in Bryansk, and also Belarus? Is that part of the what they're talking about when they say 200,000 troops? I guess so. Of course, 200,000 troops is not possible from Europe. Europe has been talking about something like 25,000, 40,000. Different numbers have been thrown from various European politicians and also people in European militaries. And I just chose to use 100,000 because it's as an example, because it's in between. I did present this when Fabian was there, so I'm not going to go very deep into this. But yeah, let's say that Europe, together with allied forces, maybe other countries around the world that are willing to be a part of a coalition of a so-called coalition of the willing to deploy to this peacekeeping mission, and you arrive to a number of 100,000. The reason why I use 100,000 is because, simply personally, I don't think anything less than this will be something Ukraine is satisfied with. And the reason for that is Ukraine has pretty clearly stated they want European troops to be a tripwire that will deter Russia from ever attacking. While European leaders have said, no, we're going to put some boots on the ground in Ukraine, but we're not going to put them along the front lines. Ukraine doesn't want that. Ukraine has stated they want people on the front lines. And realistically, you would need a troop density of around 80 to 100 per kilometer. If you then mix that in with different Ukrainian units, etc., then maybe you can suffice with 100,000, even if it's far below the normal requirement of troop density along a contact line. But let's say we accept some issues that we just still have to deal with on the run, on the fly, because we don't have enough troops. And the reason for why you need all these troops around the front line is because, for them needing to be European, or at least have Europeans in the mix, is because Ukraine doesn't trust that we will react unless we have people that will be there whenever the Russians try to attack Ukraine again. And for that to be real, they would have to be spread all around the contact line right now, and probably with a less density requirement along what is the border towards Belarus, and also towards northern Russia, northern Ukraine towards Russia there. So there's no contact going, there's no hot war in this top part towards Bryansk right now, but it is still going to be a problem, right? I kind of described the requirements for that to happen, and it is obviously completely unrealistic that Europe will be able to field this. 100,000 men at the front lines would mean a requirement for at least 300,000 people over 1.5 years. If you assume that we're going to do normal rotations, maybe the rotations will be longer than 6 months, but then it doesn't really take away that the requirements for troops will be at all times 300,000 just for frontline troops. If you add all the logistics and support, you arrive to a number which is obviously not sustainable for Europe without US support. So that is why I say this is really a bad scenario for Ukraine and for Europe, because we're not going to be able to deploy this. And then when it comes to any sort of frontline mission, I don't think Europe is going to put soldiers in harm's way. I think we're not going to be. I think that what Starmer and Macron has presented, this sort of presence on the territory of Ukraine to deter Russia, but nowhere at the front lines is likely. But if you put people on the front line, people are going to die, even if there is a ceasefire. The most likely reason because of mines and the detonated ordnance, so UXO. And I don't think any European country is ready for doing that right now, unfortunately. So what I propose is that instead of going down this route, Europe should increase its support to Ukraine right now. And also, we should put this mission that the French and the UK are talking about right now, we should put it in Ukraine anyways. We should field some sort of mission. I'm not sure exactly to what scale it needs to be. That can be something for later, but some sort of mission with a significant military presence. The obvious excuse for doing this would be training Ukrainians on the ground in Ukraine. It will definitely increase the risk that something will happen to our forces. It would be significantly lower than if you put a peacekeeping mission on the front lines, but it politically looks like an escalation, and I call it escalate to de-escalate. Russia is a bully and really doesn't stop doing anything until you kind of push back to them and put them in an awkward situation which they didn't expect. So I advocate for Europe to increase the efforts massively when it comes to procurement for Ukraine, funding for Ukraine's own domestic production, and then increase the escalation level that we can do within our powers by doing something that is not really that risky for us if you compare it to the risk that we will have a very unstable peace in Ukraine that is likely to not last, and also a significantly higher risk that Russia will attack a NATO ally in the east somewhere within the next few years. So yeah, that's what my article is about. If someone wants to discuss that, we can, but yeah, after that we're gonna go towards what happened in last week, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Does anyone on the panel have any questions for Erlend?
Don't see any.
Okay.
I may have a question. And hello, Erlend. Hi, everyone. And I have a question regarding the possibility to have personnel on the front line, and how you see as a further threat the problem of having a significant amount of personnel on the front line that can be observed and studied, and so in some sense analyzed by the enemy, because this is not Kosovo, is not the war is not concluded, and essentially you are acting as a bumper between two forces. Okay, one aligned mostly with us, but the other one is belligerent and is preparing for further escalation. So essentially, you know that the other side is interested in gathering as much information as possible. Even the time of response of QRF and other things can be studied, because I guess that if the Taliban were able to do that, the Russian will have means to study our forces there. How you perceive this other risk?
I don't see that as a risk which is a deal breaker in this sense. It's of course something to consider when you put forces next to an adversary, and also this massive representation of our capabilities, which it would have to be. I mean, they're doing signal intelligence and human collection of just imagery and filming our bases all the time anyways. But yeah, like when it comes to the operational level, what we can do, they can test, they can do study of how we react on a larger scale for sure. If this sort of mission would ever to happen, which I'm describing, I think that would deter Russia. I don't think they would attack Ukraine again. The problem is that, of course, Europe's capacity of doing it. We would have to pull forces from everywhere else, and thus give Russia the opportunity to attack maybe in the Baltics or Romania or something.
Yeah, because what you mean is that even if you have the capacity, these could remove forces somewhere in other region, even unpredictable areas.
Yeah, I don't see at this point in time any way we could field what Ukraine needs as a security guarantee, as they've stated, without pulling forces away from Baltics, Finland, Romania, everywhere else, which is a part of the so-called eastern flank of NATO.
Yeah, I understood. Thank you. And personally, I I think that it's true that you may say that there is a show of force on the front line, so these should act as a deterrent. But my fear is that the amount of forces that then in the end will end up in on the front line will be much less, and so in some sense they can experience a real threat of being attacked, because if Russia want to go all in, they definitely can overmatch in numbers at least, and possibly also in capabilities, because as we have documented a few weeks ago, they still continuing in increasing their defense industry output. So my concern is pretty much that this is an high-risk mission with a very low bar result, because we don't we may deter Russia, but we don't remove the problem. We remove resources from other region, and possibly with the idea, the false security of having essentially deter Russia, we do not follow up in investment, which is another issue, because once peace is achieved, I fear that most of the government, especially of South Europe, will immediately decide to don't commit any more or further investment in defense, and these in 3-5 years, maybe even less, will empower the aggressor. So that's my constant fear, in all these scenarios. And this is why I don't think we should stop. We should stop to talk about a peacekeeping mission, and should try to push for continuing supporting the war effort. Because I think it's much more dangerous to have a revanchist empire on the doorstep rather than a failed one.
Yeah, I totally agree. So we got some questions in chat, and I'll try and answer them. Would it be an option to partition a small strip along the contact line into diplomatic missions? Basically, consularies with very long gardens. That would be a judicial hack, but act as a strip. All this is it's a very theoretic approach, and that's why it will fail, because Russia will just look at it as a joke and say, like, well, you actually don't have people there, so they would just test it, and Europe wouldn't do anything, and thus fail. Which is
real quick, Erlend, I assume people know what tripwire means, but just to make sure everyone's on the same page, what we mean by tripwire is that it's not enough to actually meaningfully stop a Russian military invasion, but the theory is that it would be something that would risk Europe intervention to a degree that Russia doesn't want to, quote, trip the wire, right? So that's what we're talking about. So go ahead, Erlend.
Yeah, exactly. And this tripwire that was proposed by just my profile name is, instead of actually putting people on the front lines, you say that Norway owns this part, Sweden owns this part, and then you partition the whole front line. So theoretically, it's a sovereign territory of NATO country. That I understand the approach, very theoretical, but the only thing that would actually work is to put people in harm's way, and that's the tripwire that Ukraine wants. They want people that are putting their lives at stake on the front line in case the Russians attack. And the reason for why they want them along all of the front lines, and possibly also the border towards Belarus partially, is because they expect the Russians to test wherever they feel that there is no or low likelihood that Europe will respond. And when they test and succeed, then all hell breaks loose, because then everything falls apart until a very, very hard kinetic response actually happens from Europe, right? And the theory, and that's a different thing that isn't mentioned in the article, that has been proposed, at least by some military thinkers in Europe and France and also UK, have kind of talked loosely about this, is that there will be a substantial air support mission attached to this the so-called peacekeeping mission that they're proposing and trying to put together right now, and that is the real kinetic response that is going to be used in case the Russians violate any ceasefire agreement. My fear when it comes to this particular is that yes, it in theory would work. The problem is that Russia knows that Europe is not likely to go all out air war against Russia alone, and incrementally. So let's say that Europe would start firing missiles and cruise missiles on Russian targets and drop bombs, etc., on targets along the front line to respond to an attack again and a break of ceasefire from Russia. the likelihood that we will be able to sustain that for a considerable amount of time is very, very small, because our magazine depth is just not sufficient for that. And why I think that is a bad solution is because I think the Russians would just take the beating for as long as Europe is able to do anything. And then at a certain point, Europe is like, oh, we're actually starting to run low on munitions, and we will have to stop the intervention long before that, because we need it for our own protection. So in my opinion, a clear opinion is that this is not a viable option, and I don't think Ukraine will accept to a peace agreement when this is what is being proposed by Europe.
Yeah, and like also just that there are better options than this, right? Like even if it is potentially viable at great cost, like there are probably ways to. I would just argue supporting Ukraine now is just seems like a much more sensible option than committing to this, right?
Yeah, I mean the most sensible option when the U.S. is not committing to either backstop for supplies, etc., as has been proposed, or actually put boots on the ground themselves, which I think Ukraine would be satisfied with, is to continue to arm Ukraine, right? That is the cheapest option in the long term by any chance, and also probably what Ukraine wants right now, because they assess the Russian capabilities of continuing this fight, at least with the similar intensity, is very limited. I don't think Ukraine would have gone to these meetings that we've seen this week with the same intentions, unless they evaluate their own fighting capabilities above the Russians, as long as they have Europe's back, or Europe has their back. I mean, I see another question.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free in chat to put them up.
Kellen asks, any ceasefire benefits Russia, but militarily Ukraine can also rearm. Which side would be better at rearming? And I guess Daniele can also answer this. I like, in theory, if Europe wants, we can rearm a lot more and better than Russia. The problem is that we've seen very problematic commitment to this from Europe, whilst Russia has fully committed. And Daniele can probably answer better.
Yeah, thank you. There is another issue with this. There is an elephant in the room, and this is the conscription. Because in the same moment that there is a peace deal, the martial law will be lifted, and essentially the Ukrainian army will be, for sure, will lose a great part of its veteran as well, because they will be able to return home. I'm sure that the retention will be not as bad as we expect, but there will be a substantial drop, and also the impossibility to impose conscription will disappear, so it will be totally volunteer. And this will not play well for the Ukrainian army. So they may have, in theory, the equipment, but then you need the manpower. So, and even if Ukraine decide to increase the recruitment and with our help, it will require time in a kind of peace situation for a democratic government to recruit people and to put them in the position to be able to fight. Instead, Russia doesn't have any of these limit. They can do essentially pretty much whatever they want with their people. They have shown these along these 3 years. So I think on this point we need to be more careful on who is the advantage. In terms of industry, as Erlend said, we have a lot of cash, but the problem is always that democracies need leaders that are able to take decision in decent amount of time, because for example, all the history around the 155 now is starting to become less a problem after 3 years. If most of the decisions that have been made in 2023 were done immediately at the start of the war, even 6 months after the start of the war, we would be in a much better position today, and some situation would be avoided. So we need to be careful, because democracies have a very big inertia, but they have the advantage that when these governments start to roll, they are constant and very efficient, unless normally government like Russia tends to become very quick at the beginning, but then very inefficient. So this is also why I really do not welcome any idea of peace deal now, because Russia has been tired. Russia has been stopped. I remember we were discussing about the potential of losing, even having Russian arriving to Dnipro in Tochnyi, but then this never materialized. And the reason is because there is a very big issue with logistic. So I don't think this ceasefire would benefit by any chance us, because Ukraine is not gaining territory, but is for sure making Russia paying a lot for what they take. And if we are able to rearm now Ukraine, then something can happen in the next year.
Yeah,
Yep.
I remember reading that in terms of real purchasing power, like the Russian military is currently or the Russian budget is currently outspending the entire Europe like military budget. Like that it's about equal, but Russia's spending a little more. So I mean, that should just put into perspective like how serious Russia is about being on this war economy footing. Yeah, go ahead.
Another question from Joe. How quickly is Europe's increase in military expenses and expansion? It seems to be slow, but slowly accelerating. Will it speed up? And this is all determined by political will. Yes, the private industry are doing things on their own. They're making investments, but as Daniele at least have been talking about before, the industry is not going to do what is needed unless they either get clear signals from the governments in Europe that there will be massive new orders coming down the road, or already placed orders. There won't be a true change in the industry. And yes, things have happened, lots of positive things in Europe, but still there is a lack of determination and political will shown for at least some of the industry, because they're still holding back.
I think like Europe faces a double problem, right? They're now effectively on their own for security. So they seriously many countries need to rearm. And as Daniela said, like probably introduce some kind of conscription and things like that, right? Like Poland did this just before the invasion, I think, introduced like a territorial defense force similar to Ukraine, but maybe I'm mistaken about that. But yeah, I would imagine most European countries need at least some kind of way to resolve the manpower problem. They need to increase spending in their own security, and they need to also arm Ukraine. So this is a huge problem that requires, I would say, in basic terms, like a reorganization of society on a certain level, where we need to accept that people are going to be, or I should say, Europe. Unfortunately, seems like the Atlantic now separates us. But that Europe needs to train people, and Europe needs to build like a meaningful military deterrent to protect itself. It's going to be difficult to like the budget required for that, and the level of participation from society required for that means that the real changes need to be made at the government level and at the lower levels in order for this to work. And we haven't seen that happen yet. We've seen positive developments, but we haven't seen anyone come close to crossing the threshold of taking this as seriously as it needs to be taken, I guess. Do you agree or disagree, Erlend?
Yeah, the problem is that we've seen good steps taken in many countries in Europe when it comes to industry and also procurement for our own militaries, right? But the overall majority of the military forces in Europe are still very far behind when it comes to what level of amount of troops they need, the equipment needed, etc., for actually being able to defend and deter Russia long term. And that is not going to happen until, instead of investments in the tens of billions range, we see investment in the hundreds of billions, and very large orders being placed at European arms manufacturers. And that's still not really happening. And we're 3 years into this. As Fabian said when we had him on as well, it's really, really hard to understand why it's been taking this much time. At least my perception is that the industry is a lot better posed to be able to receive those orders now, and probably would react a lot faster now than they would react 3 years ago if they get the orders needed. But still, like we just aren't ready for what is after a hot war in Ukraine. Like when the hot war in Ukraine stops at some point, we need to be ready for the after, being it a weaker Russia or even a stronger Russia.
Yeah, and on this perspective, I think is just to give to the viewer an idea. There is the new article that I just a few days ago I published. There is a very good graph from a researcher, Wolf. It's very recent, 2024, and yeah, that one. And if you go through the end, yeah, that I think is that one. Yes. So in this graph, you see two lines, a blue one, which represent the total defense spending. This is about Europe, NATO. And you can see the drop since 1990, and you can see the increase essentially associated with the war. You can see that where we were in 2014, this is an average across the entire EU NATO members. You can see is appalling. Was less than 1.4%, and slowly increase, as you can see. And there is so this is a positive outcome, but as we discussed many times internally, it's not enough, because this is very similar, you know, when there was COVID and the government were trying to contain the increase in virus transfer. So they introduce a new law, new restriction, but always appear that any law needed some time to have an effect, and you can see the mistake done by the government in real time, because for several months you still see this constant increase of deaths. And this is exactly the same, because any delay that the government will put in committing a serious amount of resources into this will delay a lot of projects and a lot of activities that could be done faster, or at least earlier. So the trend is good, but it's good. This trend should have been done like before the war, because being at this level means that there are countries that are much lower than 1.5%. And now everyone is trying to ramp up, but we just reached 2%, and this was the bare minimum. You know what I mean? And in this graph is also interesting, because they were able to track also the amount of money, so the percentage of these 2%, essentially, how much of this is spent in new equipment, and you can see it's less than half of that. So this means that when you increase your capabilities, there is also a recurring cost that you have to cover, and these need to be covered. Otherwise, you cannot operate those vehicles or those systems. So if you want to acquire more, it's not just buying the equipment, it's maintaining, operating, keeping a troop trained. So for this reason, Erlend was talking about hundreds of billion, big order, which means big commitment to the budget. 3% is probably the bare minimum to see significant change.
Yep. And as you mentioned a little bit, Joseph, we will have to take certain decisions in Europe that will be affecting the society, right? So not necessarily cutting welfare and health, even though I do think that might be something we need to look at, or at least spend less, maybe not, maybe finding ways to save money, which we didn't look at before, etc. But in my opinion, most of this should be financed by ending the European austerity hysteria that has been destroying European economy since 2008, 2010. And the Euro crisis has put some sort of syndrome on European politicians, which, in my opinion, is right now showing its damages. Right, I'm sure if Gao wants to talk about the debt break, he can, but it's not only Germany, right? It's other countries too.
Yeah, absolutely. And just for like perspective, right? Russia this year increased its military budget by 25%, and that puts their GDP relative spending at 6.3%, right? And we're struggling to get Europe back up to 2.2%. And yeah, it's just I don't know, that like for Russia, this is very real, right? And also, it's not just the raw spending, the government spending, but also that like they have prioritized the defense industry above all else. Like all the government programs, all of the incentives that have been given to the oligarchs, like all of this, the Russian like business establishment, for lack of a better term, has been totally incentivized to prioritize the defense industry on a level that, like, in Europe, that's just not happening, right? So Russia has a lot of advantages in this area. I'm not suggesting, again, Erlend's totally right. Like, if Europe takes this seriously, as hopefully they should and they will, like, this isn't a question. Like, Europe could easily flex on Russia, but right now, the unfortunate truth is, relative to Russia, they're not taking it very seriously, and that's what we need to see change, I think, to really be more confident.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say that for this to happen, this is not enough. Even if we're just talking about the UK and France and maybe some Scandinavian countries willing to put boots on the ground, the spending needs to go up significantly, because if we are in any future that we are theorizing about, and I do want to say I'm grateful for Starmer to say what is needed, that they are willing to eventually at some point put boots on the ground, right? That work that is being done and will be done by France and the UK to lead this, those preparations should take place anyways. I just don't like that is the main topic that they want to talk about right now. But the thing is, for us to be ready to do this, we will have to spend an astronomical amount of money and resources, and also probably look at models like conscription in countries that have abandoned it, right? Scandinavia and Finland already base the recruitment on conscription in the first place. But there are lots of European countries that probably will need to look at that, and it's going to take not months or a year to change that. That's something that takes several years and even decades to fully implement, right? And we're just so far on the back foot that I don't see anything like this, which is being proposed by certain people in Europe and Ukraine, to be feasible at this time. Yeah, Daniele, you wanted to reply to Marino.
Yeah, but it was more a joke, of course, a BA system.
I think you see basically a bunch of different companies, right? BA System is the largest because they own so many subsidiaries. Rheinmetall is very large.
In reality, Rheinmetall and BA System are essentially not the same company, of course, but they share a lot of different things, different sector. In reality, now, apart the joke, the question is intelligent in itself, because we have good industries. We have good industries in aerospace, in land, and in space as well. But again, I want to stress this again, these industries need commitment, because if they need to deploy and train, and of course also Leonardo, they need not even directly the money for sure, but they need the politician to commit to something, and this need to be sure, because otherwise they cannot just invest on a wish. You know what I mean? So this is the biggest problem, the uncertainty that the European leaders, every European leader had so far. The only one that looks like more inclined to spend is Merz, but of course we need to see if his claims are backed by action. Olaf Scholz did a job that I think was decent in the situation. Also, looking at the situation of the Bundeswehr in the same moment that the war started was terrible. Now it's much better, but of course, need time. So there is an incredible need of commitment, I think, and I agree that if a mission is going to be deployed, we need to go much higher than the commitment that there was during Iraq or Afghanistan, because this is not the same scenario, which will need much more resources. And I see in the chat that now there is the run to essentially mention all the defense and aerospace company.
Yeah, Europe
Yeah,
has such an abundance of them. Like the technology is there. It's just a question of
Yeah.
like scale, right? Like, I mean, I think one area that Europe is really lacking. There are certain areas that Europe has capacity already. They just kind of need to expand and ramp it up, artillery and aircraft and things like that. But it seems like missiles is an area where Europe really needs to start getting a little more serious in terms of the scale. Like Russia has a very serious missile industry, and if they ever turned it on Europe, I don't know. It seems like Europe needs more missiles.
And this is very untrue, because we have a very good missile industry, of which I am very proud of. The only problem is the fact that these industries have been producing a very much low quantity for so long, and they need to scale up. France has a magnificent missile industry in terms of propulsion and guidance. They are very good. UK has the same, but of course more in certain areas rather than. Norway has very good capabilities. So Italy as well. The problem is that the government needed to organize, commit resources, assign tasks, and decide who do what, and do this in a collective effort, not every nation by itself, because that would be a disaster, or at least not that efficient.
Yeah, the technology is good. For sure.
The thing is that we could do this all on our own, each country on our own, if we actually committed enough resources to it, but that wouldn't be efficient at all. And also on top of that, we see France, for instance, not really ramping up at all compared to what is needed. Germany not ramping up the orders for these type of systems. UK very marginally, and that just it's not enough. It really just isn't enough, and that's why we need some sort of big coordinated thing to happen in Europe, or else it's going to look very bleak. But yeah, I think so. I wanted to put this into a segue of some sort of segue to what happened this last week, because the pretext was this sort of peace deal, ceasefire talks that the US has started at the Munich conference, or the Ramstein conference, just before the Munich conference, sorry. And then we had some dramatic events on Friday. Who wants to lead on what happened on Friday?
I can start, because I just had the bad idea of looking at the entire event from the start. So if you want, I can start to introduce the entire discussion in the Oval Office.
Yeah, sure.
So on Friday, after a week of quite intense diplomatic activity from President Macron, and Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who they essentially went to Trump, to the Oval Office and to the White House, and then to the Oval Office to discuss the need to give, first of all, give space to Ukraine to the table of the negotiation, and also to Europe indirectly. This was the message. And I think the decision of sending Macron and Starmer came from two main reasons. The first is the only two that at the time committed to go with troops on the ground to ensure the capability of keeping the peace that Trump was essentially starting to negotiate with Russia. And of course, this was done also in a way to try to persuade the Trump administration and Trump itself that there was, and then at least as the plan are, there is still the requirement of a backstop, as they call, from US. So US have to promise help in case Russia breaks the ceasefire and attack the peacekeeping mission. During these two meetings, both were quite soft. I have to say that there were some exchange, especially with Macron, that where President Trump tried multiple times to spread misinformation, and in particular saying that Ukraine has taken in aid from US around 350 billion, which is completely a lie, and also reiterating many times that Europe has given less than America. And President Macron and also Prime Minister Starmer replied to this in different ways. Macron was more strong, I have to say. He also stopped Trump by taking with his hand the knee and essentially literally making physical contact with him. And Keir Starmer was very British. He intervened only by words, but essentially very politely say the reality, which is that UK and EU in general contributed nearly more than 50% of, and only a small fraction of the aid are in the form of loan guaranteed by the Russian asset. And but doesn't matter what they said. Essentially, Trump continued with his show, which I think is mostly for its own electorate. It's not for us. And this reminds me that when we see Trump, we start to see the same behavior that we see with Putin. When he speaks, there are information that are for us and information that are for his own people. And then all these meetings were done in a way to try to prepare the ground for the visit of Zelensky, who was supposed to sign this rare earth deal. For who doesn't know about this, since this summer, President Zelensky decided that he wanted to also explain why financially is important to keep Ukraine as a sovereign nation, because there is a lot of natural resources which are completely not used by Ukraine for different reasons, and so there is an opportunity essentially for Europe and for US. And this was a move to try to persuade eventually Trump to step in favor, because he knows that Trump loves to be called a businessman, and so he tried to use this line to attract Trump in supporting Ukraine more boldly. So to cut it short, as we knew, the deal wasn't signed, and the reason is because during the press conference in the Oval Office, what happened is that there were in the three main actor in this interview were President Zelensky, President Trump, and there was also the Vice President J.D. Vance. It started always as a very grotesque spectacle because Trump was always saying things that were very difficult to receive if you are the president of a country that has been invaded. But essentially, I did like a list of different talking points of Trump, and one of these was that he repeated constantly was his effort to put Ukraine and Russia on the same level. So, for example, he was speaking about the death. Oh, this Russian young soldier are died. And then after a second or two, he said, and also Ukrainian. And this is systematic. And this you can see from Zelensky facial expression, which was very vivid during the entire interview, that he was feeling this, not in a good way, because this is the classical type of dialogue that you have with any pro-Russian, anyone who believes to propaganda, trying to put both sides on the same and then maybe saying, oh, but well, it's also a bit of your fault. So in all this discussion, there were a lot of questions, some also quite inappropriate, like one regarding how Zelensky was, what Zelensky was wearing, why he was not wearing a suit. And he replied most of the time with sarcasm, with also information. He was questioned about multiple time about any negotiation with Putin, and everything was going pretty well. And I have to be honest with you, in the end, he was able also to intervene and correct Trump multiple times on, for example, the fact that Putin has violated a lot of international law. He explained also in plain English why certain things were bad. For example, the fact that even if you are in war, there are rules that need to be respected, and Russia doesn't. So he was trying his best to explain to the American public that what his country is facing is not only an enemy, an historical enemy, but also an aggressor who systematically violate laws. And he corrected Trump also when he said that Europe was not doing anything, that was essentially just taking a small step despite being so close to the conflict. And he honestly defended us always with politeness, without any particular intervention, but always with truth. And situation essentially start to derail when, for some reason, J.D. Vance intervened in a conversation, because the point was, and this I think was also driven by different questions from the press, which was asking, what about the security guarantee? And around this topic, essentially the entire interview and entire meeting collapsed, because Zelensky was trying to stress that these security guarantees are the center of the discussion, are required because Putin have been always capable of signing ceasefire, and then violating them systematically. And on the other side, Trump was saying, essentially, I cut it short, but essentially was saying, yeah, but Biden is an idiot, Obama is an idiot, Merkel and the European are idiot. I know Putin, he knows me, he will not do this because it's of me. And from that, essentially, the conversation become more and more complex, until there was a confrontation between J.D. Vance and Zelensky, who tried to reply to J.D. Vance, but did not a mistake, but essentially probably stepped on something that for Trump was just the signal that he wanted to attack directly Zelensky. And this also show you that there was a very close, if you look at the interview, especially the last part, you will see that there is a very significant dialogue between Trump and J.D. Vance. So I think they prepared this because as soon as Zelensky did not the mistake, but essentially he said, you will feel this. So essentially it's not a threat, but is a reality. If Europe fall under Russian control or Europe goes to war, for US will be a very big problem also economically, and they will feel this. But essentially, this was the point of no return because Trump started to shout against Zelensky, who tried to defend himself. Trump told him, "Oh, you have no card. You are losing this." And I have to say that Zelensky was perfectly capable of understanding. He was not in confusion, despite was pointed, even sometimes touched on the shoulder, shouted at, because when he heard that you are not going to win this, he essentially stopped, raised his hand, and essentially said no.
Daniele, can I ask you a question, mate?
Yeah.
Anyone here, actually? Thanks for breaking down that video for us. I'm wondering, do you think it is either speculation or quite manifest to say that this was a planned attack on the Ukrainian president by Vance and Trump, who were obviously baiting Zelensky from the moment Zell stepped out of his vehicle outside the White House? They sought to humiliate him in front of the world's media, like this was some kind of communist-style public shaming meeting, public character assassination, with their victim having no choice but to submit or having no ability to actually answer back in that situation. You know, Zelensky had no true agency to have a proper dialogue there, to actually answer Vance, even though he fought his corner. And we all recognize when someone's being bullied. We recognize when somebody is being ambushed in terms of a confrontation. And Zelensky thought he was being welcomed there, and he was verbally abused. And these counterfactuals that were thrown at him by Vance, Zelensky certainly seemed like this wasn't talked about before the media conversation in front of, all the entire world's media began. So does this appear to be a planned strategy, or is this merely a conversation in front of the world's media that escalated?
No. I think it was. I mean, I don't think. I'm sure it's planned, and I tell you why. Because since the beginning, Trump was mentioning about, oh, this will be, or this is great television. He said from the first moment. So he knew that something was boiling. You can see the fact that there were so many. I mean, now it's normal, but there were quite a few pro Trump or pro MAGA news agency who essentially made a very very stupid question to Trump in order to put Trump as the peacemaker, the guy who wants to solve the things, and then Zelensky essentially as the one that doesn't want peace, that want to continue the fight. But in reality, Zelensky destroyed the plan because he accepted what they were saying, but tried to show to the American public, especially because he was speaking more with the American people, what is the war and how the war was arrived to that point. Because as he said, this war doesn't start at some point. He said in this exact way, and then started to explain the entire war since 2014. And when this happened, after this, JD Vance essentially started to make like because it was obvious that Trump was talking shit. Sorry for the language, and he has no idea how these things works.
Okay, so
And
if he had no idea, sorry to interrupt, Daniele. So if he had no idea, then it was not planned, but it
was planned.
I know it certainly did look like it was planned. So therefore, if it was planned, then this is not how an ally behaves. This is not how an ally during wartime behaves. Therefore, why was this planned? And does this indicate policy from the US with regard to military aid? And therefore, are they being disingenuous with regards to saying maybe we might cancel military aid? And therefore, is it entirely reasonable to conclude from this that the US's policy position on military aid for Ukraine is to stop military aid to Ukraine and for Ukraine's allies to watch Ukraine become, at the current rate, less able to defend itself against ballistic missile attacks because it cannot replenish its magazine depth of PAC-2 JAM interceptors, etc. And we're going to have to watch Ukraine get increasingly more devastated than it already is. And we're going to have to watch additional numbers of people die in Ukraine. And we're going to have to watch that interception rate drop. And all because of these two fucking bastards in the White House who picked a fight with Zelensky for their own ideological motivations, whatever they are, they're doing this. And it was planned. And they're enemies of Ukraine. And by extension, they are enemies of Europe, the UK, Europe, and all of Ukraine's allies around the world. That's their policy position.
So I think that, I mean, to try to put every fact one next to the other. First of all, Zelensky went to this meeting, and even Macron and Starmer went to this meeting knowing, at least no, Macron no, but Starmer yes, knowing that the US for the first time essentially voted against and with Russia. So against Europe, against the free world, and with Russia. So this is already an indication that things are not exactly as usual as it have been. So this is the first point. The second point is the fact that now I just posted into the Discord. Johnson is saying that Zelensky needed to resign or may need to resign, and there are a lot of Americans asking for this. So what they are doing now, they are essentially pressuring Europe to ask Zelensky to resign, which is not going to happen. And then what? We don't know, but of course, one of the reason why Starmer and Macron, and also especially also other people like Meloni, are trying to salvage these is for what you say. At the moment, Europe can probably, if they want, support Ukraine without US at a greater cost. But there are things that we simply don't have because we don't have enough production capability, and is protection for a ballistic missile. So even when there was this talk with Zelensky, I don't know if these refer to that, but Trump said to him, look, without us, you have no card, you are losing these, you are getting in very big trouble. So I don't know how much this was connected to something real. It was just shouting stuff against Zelensky, like a bully at high school. But I think, in general, I think you are going in the good direction, and I think US at the moment, but this is not only at the moment, should be considered as not aligned with our same objective, to put it mildly.
Okay, thanks, mate. A policy position. Can I bring in Joseph? You're the only American on this panel. Would this policy position be likely to change?
No. So yeah, like man, I mean, this is obviously very complicated. I think, I might have mentioned this on the stream back when Trump was elected, but I think I said something to the effect of like, I definitely said this, on the record somewhere, that like, it's going to get a lot harder to understand what's going on. Like once Trump is president, it's going to be like how we deal with the Kremlin, basically. Like everyone's going to be like, no, his secret agenda is this, his secret agenda is that. And so it's, we can only say like what happened, and we can only say like to some degree like what people talked about, like how it happened. And a lot of that relies on us going by what his staff is feeding the media, and some of that is probably misdirection, right? So it's all of that to say how it looked in the United States from our media's perspective and what most Americans saw. I can say that. Zelensky arrived and Trump greeted him, and he made a offhand remark about what he was wearing, and he looked visibly annoyed by the fact that Zelensky wasn't wearing the suit. And then Trump met with a delegation of congressmen from both parties and senators, and he was very well received. Like everyone, like it was all happy, smiling pictures taken. Then allegedly they went inside into the White House, and they sat and they talked without media present for like 40 minutes. People who were in the room at the time said it was like an amicable discussion. And they said the tone like shifted a little bit when the cameras showed up in a certain way. And then obviously, as Daniela said, at a certain point, it kind of broke down into like what it became. So at least from the US media's perspective, and I would say the perspective of most Americans, it looks like a effort that was made by certain parties to get them all in a room and agree to something like, oh, and also I should just mention there was like a podium, like there's a picture of like an empty podium. They were supposed to go up and have a press conference. They're supposed to have a lunch. Allegedly, the lunch was just like Trump's staff sat down and ate the lunch. Like all that to say, I think a lot of people, if it was an ambush, a lot of people in the room were very surprised by it. And if even if Trump and Vance weren't. So yeah, like at least from the American media's perspective, it was a big like it was a big reversal of what was supposed to happen. And then as far as like, will this policy change? I think no. My personal perspective on it, again, this is really just my personal views. I don't have any special insight into Trump. I don't claim to. But my view of it was that he genuinely wanted that mineral deal because he wants if you listen to what he says to people, you either have to believe that he's like some genius that's like feeding everyone fake information about him, or that he just says what he wants a lot. But he's like, I want a Nobel Peace Prize because Obama has one, and I think I should have one because I'm better than Obama.
Sorry to interrupt you, Joseph. I'm interrupting loads of people today, right? So is it possible, therefore, that this does not manifest as policy, but these two individuals in the White House have some kind of adult oppositional defiant disorder where they cannot...
Well, yeah, I think that's correct. I'll get to that. But yeah,
they recognize authority. Yeah, they recognize an authority which is a moral authority in this case. That moral authority being Zelensky defending his country, defending the people, the Ukrainian people, defending their country. He's representing them. Trump and Vance know that they have this moral authority that Zelensky has. They're nowhere. They've never been anywhere near that. They've never had to fight for anything in their lives. They've never had to pay bills. They've never had to, yeah. So, yeah, they are naturally defiant against this. If they cannot have it their way exactly as they want it, they will oppose it. But that has a lot of conditions attached that this is not the typical behavior of allies during wartime. But I'm curious as to whether you think you've seen this kind of behavior from them before, whether this is specific to Zelensky, and whether you think this can be reversed.
So good question. So yeah, like I do think some of it's specific to Zelensky. I think there is a very clear personal animosity that Trump has for Zelensky for like going back like several stages, right, to his personal history with Zelensky and all that stuff. And then I think in addition to that, as Daniela said like earlier, that Trump said some things about Zelensky, and the press conference later he clarified, or like when he walked out, he clarified to a certain degree. He just believes that Zelensky he doesn't have like any military ability to back up what he's saying, and like long story short, like he respects Putin at least insofar as that like he has his own military to back up what he's saying, and he doesn't think that like Zelensky does, right? So I think there's just a lack of respect and a lack of like we're looking at a U.S. policy that doesn't take into account any kind of what we would call the liberal school of diplomacy, which is this idea that like governments are made of people and people live in countries and countries are just, you know, containers that hold people, right? We're looking at and I hate to use this phrase because it turns my stomach and they're complete morons, but we're looking at a realist view of diplomacy where they view Ukraine as incorrectly as like not having any military power and Russia as having military power. Therefore, nothing Zelensky says really matters at the end of the day. And what he was supposed to do was show up and smile for the cameras and make Trump look good and sign the document and, you know, like give Trump a peace prize, basically. And he was, I think, to a certain degree willing to do that. You know, I can't really speculate to his motivations, but he obviously wanted the best deal for Ukraine he could get, and he wanted security guarantees for obvious reasons. And as Daniele said, like Trump's view of the security guarantees seemed to be very simple or very not very nuanced in that he believes that unlike all the other security guarantees that didn't have proper enforcement, this security guarantee without proper enforcement will be fine because he's Donald Trump. And that was what he basically said, to the point where a reporter asked that question later and he dismissed it as like, what if something falls on your head, right? What if? He's not going to do it under me, basically. And to me, I mean, the question would be, okay, that's fine under you, but that's only 4 years, God willing. And, you know, what happens in 4 years, right? I mean, what happens when Putin's gone and we're not just dealing with Putin? What about when Russia's different? Like, we don't have enough information to say that it's just enough. Like, I'll put it this way. Even if you accept on Trump's own terms what's going on, that's not good enough because, you know, the leaders will change. Putin's old. Trump won't be president forever. He's old too. Like, how do we prevent a war in the future? So, and so then your question was like, will the policy change? And is this just like personal? I think that to the degree we can understand it, I think it is personal because a lot of the Republicans are now calling for Zelensky to resign. The implication being like, we have a personal problem with Zelensky and that like we will deal with Ukraine when he's gone, basically. I don't think that should happen or is going to happen. And it's crazy to demand the resignation of the rightfully elected president of another country. So, but I think to me, that's at least a signal from them because now we have to talk about reading signals from the American government that, you know, that's their view on it, that they have a personal problem with Zelensky. But, you know, that's also a Russian narrative, right? That Zelensky is kind of responsible for everything and all this, and that the Ukrainian people or government have no say in this war, and it's all started by Zelensky and blah, 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 right? So the Trump administration, I think, is, I would say, not going to reverse policy on this. There's now, I think Trump is petty enough of a person that he won't get over this thing with Zelensky. That's number one. And number two, I think that there are serious forces in the White House that believe they can have some kind of reset with Russia. You know, Hillary Clinton's policy. I don't know how we came back there, but yes, they believe that like there's a meaningful way to reset relations with Russia, which to me is completely insane. And as long as they're there whispering in Trump's ear and they have access to Trump, I think that that's probably what's going to prevail. And that they seem to sincerely believe that like Europe is weak and Ukraine is weak, and that honestly they kind of want Europe weak so they can kind of push them around and, you know, get the best deal for weapons and stuff like that. And they don't have a problem with that. So it seems to me that they see real benefits from pursuing this policy, and that they view the world in such a way that they're not willing to reverse this policy anytime soon. There might be a slight attitude change if the agreement is actually signed, and you know, but I just don't see Trump and Zelensky ever getting along, and it's because we're dealing with Trump. I think that would be crucial to anything being successful, unfortunately. So I think you guys are right to say, like, we're pretty much writing the US out of, the US has written itself out of any meaningful agreements. I think that was obvious from the moment they said they were going to try to achieve peace without Ukraine and Europe. But now with, like, we're seeing the Trump administration, I don't think the Trump administration has taken any move so far that has realistically increased their chances of influencing the situation more to a degree where they can achieve like a peace treaty, like they ostensibly say they want. They've only undermined their own, even if you take them at their word for what they're doing, they've only undermined their diplomatic position. Now they're not really, they don't have much leverage left over Ukraine and Europe to pursue their policy. So yeah, I don't see their position changing, but it's possible they might adapt differently if the situation on the ground changes a little bit. And that will end my rant.
So, if I may, I think partially some of the things that have been pushing Trump towards this, kind of escalation of the transatlantic arguing that has culminated on Friday, is that he presented this first 24 hours, and I'm going to be, I'm going to stop the war, and then now it's a 100-day plan. From when he took office until they want an actual peace agreement to be at least signed, some sort of initial documents towards that, right? And that whole 100-day plan was being train wrecked during the last 2 weeks, and on Friday that's absolutely crashed, right? And I think that, yes, the part that he wants the Nobel Peace Prize might be an actual factor. I think there could be external factors to that as well. Trump being very, very pressured for some reason by either personal motivations or political motivations to basically protect Russia from being subject to war at any longer terms than what they are prepared for. And I think that Russia has pretty pushed the American administration pretty hard that we need this war to end right now, right? And if you want to deal with us, it has to be now, or else we're not going to have any deal. For me, that's a sign Russia knows that they have very limited time to continue the war at least as it's being fought right now. And the Americans, they want to have some sort of stake in this. And for Trump, that is maybe a peace deal and shaking hands, signing, documents, and maybe getting a peace prize. For one, I'll tell you, Trump will never get the peace prize because the people that decide who gets the peace prize are, at least after Friday, never gonna vote for a proposition where the name Donald Trump is in there. So yeah, that's not going to happen. The people that vote for the Peace Prize are basically former politicians from a wide array of parties in the Norwegian Parliament, and Trump can forget that part. But in the end, what he's seeing, being wrecked is his whole promise to get a peace deal signed. And I think because he cannot politically promise boots on the ground, right? That would be a massive blow to him politically. He doesn't want US to be a part of this at all. US money, US troops, US equipment. He doesn't want it, right? And that's what he promised his electorate. He has locked himself in a situation which is going to be very, very hard to get out of.
Yeah. All right.
I
Thank
agree.
you, Erlend. Thank you, Joseph. Thank you, Daniele. Thank you, Still Tired Gal. Why are you still tired? People want to know, mate. But we're going to wrap it up there.
I think
real quick, there's one question in the chat I wanted to add. Someone said they should take Europe's mineral deal. To my knowledge, okay, here's my understanding of what happened. You guys are free to correct me as Europeans if you know something I don't. there was a very low-level EU official who floated like, "Yeah, we're cooking up some mineral deals," and the press kind of ran with that. It's like Europe offers mineral deal to Ukraine. As far as I understand, there's no meaningful mineral deal on the table yet from Europe. There are low-level officials talking with each other, like maybe we should offer something. Does anyone have any contrary information to that?
Not really, but
It'd be a good idea. I think we could say that. Sorry, go ahead, Erlend.
yeah, I don't think you're going to see anything like this officially leaking from Europe. It's a different, little bit different when it comes to handling documents compared to the US.
Yeah, but I just mean like it's going to take a while for the governments to all coordinate to offer like a real deal. But I hope they do it. Anyway, I think Jonathan wanted to wrap up, so yeah, I'm going to turn it back over to him. Oh, go ahead, Erlend.
No, I think we should comment though what happened today as well as kind of a final, conclusion to this weekend's events. And I just want to say that Starmer did do some sort of summary of what happened during the meeting. Of course, he's not going to say everything that was said. He can't talk on the behalf of other countries, etc. One thing I did like is that he spent some time on stating that Europe must and will increase its military aid to Ukraine in the time that is coming. Anyways, this regardless of any peace deal at all. My problem is with what he said, and what I fear was kind of the general attitude is that that there should have been an acknowledgement that we have been doing far too little, too late, and that has to change for European security and for Ukraine. I think that should have been the opening statements and probably the closing statements. That would have been ideal, in my opinion. Unfortunately, it looks like they are emphasizing still a lot on this transatlantic cooperation and that US needs to be the strongest partner of Europe, etc. They still do this for, of course, for diplomatic reasons. They kind of have to, but my gosh, like which world do you live in? I see leader after leader stepping out of that meeting saying that, yeah, America is our greatest partner and most important partner, blah, blah, blah. Where are they with their heads in their sand? I understand the need to diplomatically say things, but honestly, like this is beyond what I would have imagined, that that they still cling on to this hope that the US will suddenly turn sane again, and they won't. Not under this admin, at least. Daniele.
No, I totally agree with you, and I think it would have been much better if there was some kind of declaration as well. But I have to. I think what they are trying to do now is trying to contain as much as possible the damage that this administration can do to Europe in the very short term, because we know that they are probably at least into the process of reducing drastically, and when I say drastically, really drastically, their presence in Europe. And they probably would like to try to keep them as much as possible involved in order to delay and to gather time. Because if, for any reason, in a few months, the US decide to start to demobilize troops can go away in weeks. They don't need months. And then what you do? You cannot send troops in Ukraine to do anything, because then you have to put more where the American left, which are not much, but still American troops. So, and because Putin is not waiting for anything else than creating other disasters around Europe, and we know that he's actively doing sabotage in the northern seas. So I think their attempt is to try to contain as much as possible, and also try to test a little bit Trump and see, is this guy literally going to do a pact with the devil and completely screw his old ally. Probably yes, I agree with you, and probably many of the people in that room, except Meloni, probably are even Starmer. I think they know about that, but I don't think they don't want to believe. Maybe some of them, but most of them, especially Poland, they need still the US to be somehow involved, just as a deterrent to gain time. Because honestly, militarily, probably only a few countries are ready to do anything. Poland, maybe, I don't know Norway how it is, but UK have to work a lot. We will need at least 6 months, and not with this type of funding, by the way. So my feeling is that the outcome of this meeting has been good, because at least even if they decided to be more diplomatic, they decide this together. There was a support for Zelensky has been reiterated, and I really hope that the new funding will come soon. But I think this is like a step that is necessary. In the end, if you think also, this is a 70 or more, 8 years alliance with the US. So you don't want to destroy because in a matter of days. I mean, it's probably compromised, I know, but you want to try to save as much as possible in order to have time. This is my opinion. And just to add a little bit of good news in all this, I mean, Zelensky went with the same suite to see the king, and is on his second invitation. So Trump won't be the first.
Thank
All
you,
right, thank you.
Daniele. Wrap
Thank
up.
you, Daniele. Well, I really appreciate everybody's support today. Thank you so much, everyone in the chat, everyone who's listening back, doing their ironing, housework, or at work, on their commutes, on the early train, wherever it is you listen to Tochnyi. We genuinely appreciate your support. Thank you for checking us out at our usual places: Blue Sky, X, YouTube, and of course our website, where you can find our research posts. So please stay tuned for the interviews we've got coming up in the following weeks. They're looking pretty exciting. But yeah, the fallout from the events of Friday, that's a great picture. Thank you, Erlend. We recognize our allies. We see our enemies. And we'd like to think that if the US president, that if he considers the defeat of fascist tyranny a matter of high consequence to the people of the United States and to the Western Hemisphere, that they will regard Zelensky's visit on Friday not as an appeal for aid, but as a statement of the minimal action necessary for the achievement of our common purpose. So said Winston Churchill in December of 1940 to President Roosevelt. This we will see. Thank you once again for tuning into Tochnyi. Slava Ukraini.
Heroin slava.
Heroin slava.
Smert Vorham.
Smert Voraham.
On behalf of the brave.